Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little. I'm here today with another fun hand for PokerNews.com. I want to thank you all for being here today. While this hand is getting loaded up, if you all have any questions for me, feel free to ask on Twitter at Jonathan Little. I'm always available to answer any questions that you all have because I want you to become the best poker players you can possibly be. So here we are playing a $2,000 buy-in small field tournament, and we get 8-6 of hearts on the button. Hands like this are speculative. They're certainly not great by any means, but they are often playable. So it folds around to a loose aggressive player in the low jack seat, and he raises to 400, so 2.7 big blinds or so, and it gets around to me with the 8-6 suited. And I can really go any direction with this hand. I think folding it's fine, because again, 8-6 is certainly not premium. I could also call, especially if I think the players in the blinds are quite bad. But not knowing who is in the blinds, that's not really a great idea because you're just giving the players in the blinds pretty good odds to call. The other option is to re-raise. Now, whenever you are designing a pre-flop re-raising or 3-betting strategy, you want to make sure that you are taking advantage of whatever you think your opponent's going to do incorrectly. So what I mean by that, first off, if you think your opponent's either going to 4-bet you or fold, like never call, you want to be 3-betting with hands that have blockers to your opponent's 4-betting range. That's going to be stuff like Ace X or Ace 9 or Ace 10, stuff like that, that puts your opponent in a situation where you know that there are now fewer aces left in the deck, so he's going to be 4-betting you less often, because presumably he's 4-betting with a reasonable range. Next, what if he's going to call a lot? Well, in that scenario, you want to ask what type of range is he going to be calling with, first off. Is he going to be calling with stuff like Queen 9, or is he going to be calling with stuff like, pocket 2s and whatnot? And maybe he calls with everything. It's difficult to say. As your opponent calls with more random junky big cards like Queen 9, you want to be more inclined to 3-bet hands like Ace Jack and King Queen and King Jack, stuff like that, because these hands dominate a lot of your opponent's calling range. That's going to be the case if your opponent often 4-bets, aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, ace, king, ace, queen, and then calls with the other marginal high card hands. So against those players, you want to be 3-betting just the good big cards, which is referred to as a strong linear range. Against players who you don't really know what they're going to do, often you just want to 3-bet with what is referred to as a polarized range, and that's going to be your best hands, aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, ace, king, ace, queen, maybe king, queen, and then also hands that fall right at the bottom of your calling range. And that's usually going to be the marginal suited hands, like 8-6 suited, and 9-7 suited, and Jack 8 suited, and 6-5 suited. And you could also 3-bet stuff like Ace 10, King Queen, or Ace 10, Queen Jack, etc., because those have decent blockers. So 8-6 suited is a pretty good hand to put in your 3-betting range, because when your opponent does call, what's going to end up happening is you are going to have cards that fall below their calling range a lot of the time. So you're not going to be dominated very often. You don't typically want to 3-bet hands that are very likely to be dominated, like Jack 10 suited, for example, is a hand you probably don't want to 3-bet, because if you 3-bet and get called, you're often dominated. Whereas if you call, you get to keep the pot small in position with a hand that flops well. So the small suited cards like this are quite good to 3-bet from time to time. You don't have to do it all the time, but sometimes. So anyway, I make it 1,300. Whenever you are playing very deep stacked, as we are here, we're playing 130 big blinds deep, you do want to make it a little bit on the big side, even when you're in position. So I make it 3.2x or so. We get a great flop. Flop comes 10-4-2. This is a very uncoordinated board, which means it's somewhat unlikely to hit the opponent. I mean, unless he has a 10, he just doesn't have a good hand, right? I mean, he could have 4s or 2s, sure, but it's hard for him to have a really good hand. And I have a flush draw, which is really nice, which means I'm going to have the effective nuts by the river a decent chunk of the time. And even if even if I'm against a hand like Ace Jack, I still have outs to improve to the pairs, right? So this is a great spot for me. I'm definitely going to bet. This is a situation where I should have a nice range advantage, given I'm 3-betting all the best hands, and since he just called my 3-bet, he probably doesn't have those best hands in his range. So we can make a small continuation bet in this scenario. Pot is 2,800. I decided to bet 1,100, which is often a fine play. We can maybe go a little bit bigger because we are deep stacked. As you are deeper stacked, you'll find that your bet sizes tend to need to increase just a little bit. But I think this 1,100 is perfectly fine. We're going to get called a lot. I already know that. And if I do get called here, I'm definitely going to continue bluffing on most turns and rivers unless I pick up a little bit of showdown value, like with an 8 or a 6. And the reason for that is because I know I want to keep betting my aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, right? These are all very strong hands, and they're all in my range. And therefore, I need to find some bluffs. So what bluffs make the most sense? It's going to be the bluffs that have the least amount of equity that also still have some value. You don't want to continue bluffing with 8, 6 of diamonds on a turn, on a random turn. But flush draws, especially the low ones, are almost always good to continue betting because if you check it down, you're going to lose at showdown, right? 8 high is not winning. But if you bet and your opponent folds, that's a huge success. And if they call, you still have 20% equity, which is fine. So we're going to bet the flop and continue barreling, often on the bigger side. We're probably going to bet something like 3,000 on the turn, which will take the pot to 11 if our opponent calls, and then we're probably going to jam the river. I know that seems a little bit aggressive, but that's what you have to be willing to do whenever you do 3-bet these hands. We do get an 8 on the turn, though. So I'm not going to say we get bailed out. It's always nice when you don't have to run a big bluff, but running a big bluff is a whole lot of fun. So anyway, the opponent checks. Now, the question is, should I value bet? And I don't think so. We are probably going to get called by mostly pairs if I value bet, and it's at least somewhat likely the opponent has a 10 when he check calls the flop. Of course, he could have pocket 5s, but pocket 5s is probably not going to call a turn and a river bet, and I'm not really worried about protecting against pocket 5s because pocket 5s only has 2 outs, right? It is nice to make the opponent fold stuff like ace-jack if I bet 2,000, but for all I know, the opponent may check-shove me or something like that, and I really don't want that to happen. So we're just going to check behind and try to realize our showdown value. Whenever you pick up showdown value, you just typically want to realize it. This is a situation that confuses a lot of players. They think that whenever they have this marginal made hand and a draw, that the draw is the overriding factor. But very often, the overriding factor is the marginal made hand. So ask yourself, how would you play 8-6 offsuit here? Well, you wouldn't bet it because if you bet and get called, you're unhappy. The fact that you have the flush draw is relevant and nice, but it doesn't matter if you have the best hand a lot of the time immediately. So don't take your decently strong marginal made hand and just turn it into a bluff by continuing to barrel. So looks like the replayer messed up. River in this situation was a 7. All right, I remember it's a 7. Now the opponent bets 1,250 into the 5,000 pot. Well, that's certainly unfortunate, but given the amazing pot odds I think we need to call, you may be able to find yourself against specific players who only use small bets with good made hands, and they also don't bluff very often. Good made hands being stuff like a 10 or better. If you're against someone like that, who's mainly going to bet ace 10, king 10, queen 10, jack 10, 10, 9 for a small bet size and literally never bluff, you can consider folding. But like I mentioned in the previous video for Poker News, if you have not watched all those, definitely feel free to go back and do it. They're all loaded up on YouTube, by the way, so you can easily find them. And there's a strategy video podcast or strategy video playlist that I have there that you can easily find. There's lots and lots of videos for Poker News there. I think we're on number 138 at the moment. So if you want to study poker for a day, feel free to load them up. Anyway, this is a spot where I assume my opponent's good, right? If your opponent's good, you can't fold too often. The easiest way to beat someone is to make them fold too often. And in this scenario, I need to defend with a large chunk of my range because the opponent bets so small. So when the opponent bets so small, we pretty much have to call with our pairs. So yeah, river was 7. I call, and we lose to ace 10. So it's actually kind of interesting because if the turn brought a blank and I had to continue barreling, I don't know if the opponent would have ended up folding by the river. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But like I said, I was definitely going to go for the turn bet and river jam. And that may seem very aggressive, and a lot of people think, oh, I want to wait for a better spot in a tournament. But this is a pretty good spot, especially if your opponent's range is capped at ace 10. Like, this is one of the best hands you could have. Think about all the worst hands you could have that will definitely fold to additional aggression. And don't forget, we just make a flush sometimes, which is clearly going to be good most of the time. So we kind of got bailed out, or maybe we didn't. It's tough to say. I mean, put yourself in the opponent's shoes. Would you really call a 3-bet pre-flop, check call the flop, check call the turn, then check call the river for all of your money with top pair, marginal kicker? Oh, well, top pair, good kicker, but marginal top pair. A lot of players will use that same logic. They want to wait for a better spot before risking their entire stack. And if you can make those players fold almost their entire range, bluffing it off in the spot is going to be hugely profitable. And if you're not doing it, you are definitely leaving money on the table. So that's gonna be it for this video for weekly or for Poker News. I want to thank you all very much for being here. Good luck in your games, and I'll talk to you next week.